Honored guests, my name is Dr. Colin P. Clark, Senior Research Fellow at the Soufan Center. Welcome to this Global Security Side event, Syria and the Challenges of Post-Conflict Reconstruction. This is an extremely important topic, timely and relevant, with real implications across a range of different areas. This roundtable will examine the diplomatic, economic, and security challenges of post-conflict reconstruction in Syria, while also exploring issues related to accountability and transitional justice. I'll briefly introduce our panelists, and then we'll dive right in. We've got Dr. Ben Conable, Adjunct Professor of Security Studies and Executive Director of the Battle Research Group. The Honorable Sue Eckert, Expert, Al-Qaeda ISIL Taliban Monitoring Team, United Nations. Mr. Wasim Nasser, Journalist and Middle East Specialist, France 24, and Senior Research Fellow at the Soufan Center. Dr. Jerome Dreven, Senior Analyst in Jihad and Modern Conflict, International Crisis Group. Ms. Celine Qasim, Syrian activist and researcher. Ms. Jennifer Vaughn, Senior Media Advisor and Spokesperson, United Nations Special Envoy for Syria. Ms. Caroline Rose, Director, Strategic Blind Spots, New Lines Institute for Strategy and Policy, and Dr. Patrick Haney, Senior Advisor, Center for Humanitarian Dialogue. I'm here to moderate this discussion amongst experts, and we're going to dive right in. So Wasim, I'd like to start with you. You're one of the only journalists, if not the only journalist I know, to interview Ahmed al-Shara both before he took power in Syria and after. Was the Shara different in December 2024 compared with April 2023? If so, how, and what do you think it means for the future of the country?
Well, thank you, Colin, for reminding this. So, actually, yes, I met Ahmed al-Shara back in April 2023, and it's almost exactly 2 years ago, like now. When I met him in Idlib, and not only him, other also high authorities today, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Asad Shibani. And what I can tell you is that actually, when I went back in December 2024, less than a week after the fall of Assad, I met the same man. I didn't notice any change either in the attitude or in the speech, which was very reassuring and comforting for me, because taking the responsibility to go to Idlib in 2023 was not easy. And to report what I reported at the time, either for France 24 or for CTC West Point or other research institute as the Soufan Center, of course. So actually, what he told me at the time was off the record. I could understand, but I understood really why it was off the record in 2023 when I met him again in December 2024, less than a week after the fall of Assad. Because actually he had the same speech, the same plan, the same way of tackling issues that are the real problems of Syria today. And why was it off the record at the time? Because it was too touchy to get into it regarding even his own, you see. So he had a plan ahead of others, and if it was difficult to understand at the time, but actually they deployed the plan they had, and they respected whatever he told me at the time, especially, for example, regarding other communities in Syria, or regarding even their enemies, meaning the former Assad troops or supporters in this regard. So many people were surprised to see Ahmed al-Shara, or President Ahmed al-Shara, in civilian clothes. I met him at the time in civilian clothes, you see. So I wasn't surprised. I was rather reassured about what I described at the time as the third path, regarding where his background, a third path out of global jihad, a first in the world, and maybe a blueprint for other areas in the world if this experience succeeds in a good way with the help of the international community, of course.
So certainly no shortage of challenges, as you described, particularly related to al-Shara. I wanted to ask Sue to focus on some of these challenges and to speak about what it means that there's still sanctions in place, and what are some of the implications for development, since this topic, quite broad, but looks at reconstruction of the country as well.
Thank you very much, Colin. We're playing musical chairs here. And thanks for organizing this panel. It's an incredibly important subject of which there has been a lot of discussion. It's something that, from the perspective of the organization I work for, which is the team of experts monitoring the 1267 sanctions, we have sanctions in place. There has been no revision of the sanctions, and currently there are 10 entities and 30 individuals who are associated with HTS, including Al-Shara, who was listed, I believe, in 2013. HTS, as the Al-Nusra Front, was originally listed in 2014, name changed in 2017. All of these things have been reflected on the sanctions list, but there has been no update, no change. What it means to be on the list is that there is an asset freeze, there's a travel ban, and of course arms embargo, but the first two are the ones that really affect the interim government, both the leader, the interior minister, and then the group as a whole. Sanctions are a tool, a preventative tool. It is not punitive. It is something in which it is intended to change behavior or to constrain the activities of terrorist groups. Clearly, HTS has been affiliated with Al-Qaeda, ISIL in the past as well, and for that reason, they are still listed. There are processes, though, as part of the sanctions process for travel ban exemptions, for asset freeze exemptions, and I should note that, in fact, that process has worked, I believe, in just this year. We have about 9 exemptions which have been approved. I think 3 for Jalani, and then 6 for him, and 3 for the Interior Minister. So it is a process that member states are adhering to in terms of the travel ban. Understanding that sanctions are in place, member states have an obligation to support them. But notwithstanding the notion that perhaps the HTS as an organization has dissolved or whatever, it takes affirmative action to change the sanctions. And on that basis, there are concerns of a number of member states, the Security Council, in moving forward, because concern one, that the activities that are underway within Syria provide an opportunity. The instability, or at least the uncertainty, provides an opportunity for ISIL to regroup. Remember, ISIL is, the pure state is born of blood. And so it's important that HTS not succeed for ISIL's benefit, and that therefore the opportunity to regroup, to constitute new attacks, that there could be factions, perhaps, of the HTS organization that might not go along with this. So there's a potential for instability. There is a process to delist any individual. It is prescribed. We can talk a little bit about it, but it is there if the political consensus exists within the Security Council to take that move. It's not the role of the monitoring team to suggest or to propose. It is the purview of member states, but I would just note that I believe that on popular reporting, you can see that a number of member states still have questions with regard to the activities, the goals, et cetera, of HTS and, I should say, the interim government of Syria.
Thank you. There's a lot to unpack in there. One thing you mentioned is the threat of ISIL regrouping, and that's something that a number of scholars and analysts at the forum focus on, including myself. But I would like to ask Ben, is there a way to use the rising IS threat as a focal point for some kind of collaboration?
Well, there's going to have to be. I think the fundamental challenge that we have is it's in everybody's best interest, for the Syrian people, for the new Syrian government, for all the regional actors, for the United States, for the European states, and so on, to try to help Syria stabilize, recover, to facilitate reconstruction, to support transitional justice, but also to have all the mechanisms in place to make those things work. And look, we know what broken states look like. They don't have those mechanisms in place to be able to receive tens or hundreds of billions of dollars in reconstruction funds right out of the gate. That is something that builds very slowly over time. It requires a lot of confidence building, and in the meantime, we have the rising Islamic State threat. So we're kind of on a clock here, and if we don't come to some kind of multinational, even if it's just regional, but a multinational approach to this problem, then unfortunately, I think the Islamic State is likely to beat us to the timer. So what I think really needs to happen here, instead of all of these very interesting, useful, and productive bilateral engagements, and some of the more collaborative engagements that we're having, is there needs to be some movement towards a constructed interim or more permanent body that sits between the Syrian government and all of the donor states and all the interested states, to be able to provide some, not only just some standoff for groups that don't want to engage and countries that don't want to engage directly, but also to provide that confidence building mechanism to help structure things more effectively. And that political runs across the board, political, social, and economic. And to provide also the counterterrorism structure to ensure that we still have agreements, both bilateral and multilateral agreements in place to be able to suppress and if, ideally to fully break apart the remaining Islamic State elements in Syria, because, as Sue points out, they remain a potent threat. And I'll leave it at that, but I think that's an idea that we should explore further, the idea of creating a kind of permanent, intermediate layer of structure that at the very least the Gulf Arab states, like Qatar, can use as a confidence kind of building mechanism.
Thank you. I think there's a host of obstacles here that we're going to be discussing. Just one of them you mentioned was transitional justice. Celine, you've been writing about this, thinking about this, speaking about this. Can you talk a little bit more about transitional justice as you see it in Syria and some of the challenges that lie ahead?
So just first off, being the only Syrian on the panel is a lot of pressure. But yeah, I mean, transitional justice is, I think, one of the most important things that we should be focusing on, and it should be priority. But with that being said, it is going to be, because of what we lived over the past 50 years, not just 14 years, it is going to be complex, and it is going to take time, and it is going to not look like any other case. So today, when we're looking at whether it's Rwanda or South Africa or like all of these other cases, I personally think that Syria is extremely unique and complex, so we can't just take a model and apply it. And with that being said, you unfortunately cannot prosecute every single person that has blood on their hands in Syria, because if we were to do that, we would have to put, I think, hundreds of thousands in prison. So you kind of need to go through this, and then what I think should be done is that there has to be a mechanism set up that is independent, with the authority of experts, with the authority of Syrian experts, with people that have been working on this for years and years. But also, with that being said, we do need the international help that is going to come in and guide it, but also give the complete authority to Syrians to be able to set this up. And then the thing is that it also has to be set up in a way where this mechanism understands what people want and what communities and victims and people that have been displaced, et cetera, what they want and what they believe is going to be justice to everything that they have lived. Who do we want to arrest? Who do we want to prosecute? Who is more important over others, et cetera, et cetera. And it is very, as I said, complex and unique, and that's why we need to talk about it before or as we are setting it up. And yesterday we heard Foreign Minister Shibani bring it up at the Security Council and say that they are working on it. And as I said, people are very upset. Victims, families of detainees forcibly disappeared are very upset that it's taken this long. But unfortunately, there were priorities, and I think that this one wasn't as high as it should have been. But we need to keep pushing on it being a priority for now.
Thank you. You mentioned Foreign Minister Shabani's comments at the Security Council. So I'd like to ask Jennifer, where does the UN fit in here in terms of political engagements, and if you can kind of weigh in with some of what you've been seeing?
So I'll come to that just in a minute, but to set like the broader picture, I think, as Celine was saying, you know, it's been only a few months, and the legacy, obviously, of misrule, abuses, and poverty from which Syria is trying to emerge is one of the most extensive, I think, in modern history. I think the needs also need to be mentioned. It's 16 million Syrians, so roughly 3/4 of the entire population that need humanitarian assistance. I think you've also seen that the UN has been affected by some funding issues. So in 2024, only 35% of the $4 billion that was requested was even provided. So already in 2024, there was already a massive humanitarian situation before this. The protection concerns, as Celine noted, are returnees and formerly displaced persons who are trying to return to their homes, obviously vulnerable groups and the risk of exclusion, detention, missing persons, as Celine noted, housing, land, and property issues. We've also seen unexploded ordinances almost on a daily occurrence, and then obviously the ongoing issue of protection. I think when it comes to the situation on the ground, we've seen improvements in the Northeast because of the agreement between the interim authorities and the SDF. However, in the South, because of repeated and intensified Israeli incursions and airstrikes, that's creating a very volatile situation. You saw the coastal violence as well, and then the issue of the displaced that continues in the Northwest and ensuring that they get the aid that they need via the cross-border mechanisms that will continue, I think, through September. When it comes to the political situation, our office is actually mandated by 2254, so it's a Security Council resolution from 2015. So to state the obvious, the situation has changed considerably since then. We continue to stress, however, the key principles of 2254 remain relevant. So that's inclusion and a transparent political process that will lead to elections in the future, which would hopefully be administered by the UN. The constitutional declaration that we saw issued by the interim authorities earlier this year has addressed the legal void that I would say that previously existed, because we've seen Syria has progressed from a provisional administration to a broader, more varied cabinet. So it does represent a step forward. However, the UN noted at the Security Council briefing that it doesn't yet offer a truly comprehensive structure for a political transition, which I think is also important for addressing sanctions relief. We also have seen a milestone in the sense that we're going to see the formation of the interim People's Assembly. Shara shared his perspective with my boss that that will move forward. My boss has emphasized, obviously, that we need to see the promotion of inclusivity, transparency, and openness, given that the Assembly's pressing mandate is to enact legislation, because I think the timeline for a full constitution is several years away. Obviously, another important objective, as I noted, is the peaceful reintegration of the Northeast. There have been several promising developments there, which is the joint committee and mutual visits, the emergence of a unified negotiation stance among various Kurdish factions in the Northeast, an agreement on shared security measures in Kurdish populated areas of Aleppo, commitments to withdrawal from certain areas, which now require implementation, and a collaborative effort on education policies, and a reduction in military activity by both Syrian and international forces.
This issue of funding has come up multiple times already. It's going to continue to dominate discussions. I'd like to ask Jerome about the issue of international sanctions on HCS and what the new government can do.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. When we hear from governments since December, there have been several demands to the new authorities. Some of these demands have just been mentioned, about being inclusive, about transitional justice, about basically setting up the conditions for a new Syria. But when we think of HTS as a listed organization by the Security Council and by most states as a result of the listing by the Security Council, most of the concerns are ultimately about security. So it's about regional and international security. So what was mentioned earlier on by Stu is that HTS is listed and a range of armed groups, mostly composed of foreign fighters, are also listed by the Security Council. So these groups initially were included in HTS for the past few years as a matter of control, how to impose control on them. You include them in your group, you impose new military dynamics and regulations to control them. But now it is an issue because those groups remain listed, and a range of commanders, in addition to the president and to the Minister of Interior, are listed. The issue at stake is that HTS is ultimately listed not for being quote-unquote a terrorist organization, but for its ties to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. But since 2016, so it renounced Al-Qaeda, then it dismantled in practice Al-Qaeda in the northwest of Syria, and it launched war against Islamic State. So the evidences are quite clear and are there. I don't think that there are any foreign countries that can seriously claim that HTS is still aligned to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. But some of the issues of the sanctions is that it's much easier somehow to be listed than to be delisted. The cost of delisting is extremely high, and there is little political incentive for states to delist a group. Hence why when we look at the groups that are listed internationally, many of them no longer exist. Even individuals who are killed are still listed by the Security Council, because you don't have an incentive as a state to promote the delisting of a group. So as part of those sets of demands, there are demands about international security. So that mostly concerns the foreign fighters that remain in Syria. Foreign fighters are not very numerous, but they come from a range of countries, including Arab countries, some Western countries, also Central Asia, such as Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. The largest group is composed of Uyghur Muslims from China. So it means that every single of those countries are concerned about the potential return of these individuals and about the potential risks that they pose to their own security. But one of the main impediments now for the international community about how to think of foreign fighters is that we don't have clear expectations. What are the demands from the international community beyond just saying that those fighters should not be part of the army? Should we, do we promote a way out? We don't want to have them in the army. It's unlikely that they are going to be renditioned to their home country. So what can we do in the meantime? I think the discussion has to focus, part of the discussion about HTS's listing and about the sanctions has to focus on this particular topic. And so I think we need also fresh ideas, both from foreign countries, including the P5, from the members of the Security Council, and from the government. I think there are ways to address it, but we just have to think, originally about the issue, about what are the conditions that we're expecting for the government.
Thank you very much. Until the funding issue, which ties into stabilization, is resolved, or at least until there's progress toward that end, there's likely to be a continued reliance on illicit economies. We've seen this, it's not unique to Syria, in many post-conflict settings throughout the world. Caroline, I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about some of the illicit economies. This is something you study quite closely, counter-narcotics, border issues. What needs to be done there, and what are you seeing?
Thank you so much, Colin. And I also wanted to say thank you so much to the Soufan Center, to the Global Security Forum for having me, and also having this very timely discussion on Syria. I actually just came back from Damascus last evening, so I've got hopefully some fresh insights to this particular issue of illicit economies. I think that there was initially the impression after the regime fell in December and a number of laboratories that were exposed for the production of an amphetamine-type stimulant called Captagon, there was this immediate impression of, okay, we're going to see a severe reduction in the circulation and production of Captagon inside of the country. Of course, the regime and its security apparatus, its cronies, relatives of Bashar al-Assad, were all heavily involved in the sponsorship of the industrial scale production of Captagon, and also, of course, other illicit economies like small arms, tobacco, cigarettes, counterfeit currency, etc. And so as a result, I think that initially there was this impression of, okay, this is going to be a problem, but it's going to dissipate into thin air. And in the resulting months, we've actually seen the opposite. We've actually seen illicit economies become a lot more complicated, more complex, more nuance inside of Syria, because there's been this major disruption of industrial scale production. And now a lot of these criminal actors have gone underground. They've left for Iraq. They've left for the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. They've gone into Turkey. And in some cases, some of these criminal networks have even gone into Europe, into Germany and the Netherlands, where they've been producing amphetamine-type stimulants like Captagon, but at a much smaller scale. Additionally, and something that as an analyst this concerned me very much, we saw clashes along the Syrian-Lebanese border, clashes where many illicit networks and families that were prominent in cross-border trades, such as the Zaiter family, they were heavily involved in trying to defend their control over key smuggling routes between Syria and Lebanon. We've also seen some concerning reports from, for example, the Jordanian Anti-Narcotics Directorate and the Jordanian Armed Forces about increased activity, though of course this has not resulted in an increase in seizures. But they're also very concerned about smuggling networks that are operating both in Lebanon but also in southern Syria, in Suwaida and Doha, being able to consolidate enough authority and control, not necessarily be, and also challenge the interim government authorities in Damascus. So I think that looking at this problem, al-Shara and his government, they've got a key challenge here, where they have these networks that are dormant. Many of them have a lot of control and influence in key border areas like Doha, Suwaida, also along the Iraqi border. And it's going to be very difficult for them to try and consolidate further control, crack down on illicit activity, and promote a more comprehensive counter-narcotic strategy. This is not a huge priority at the moment because sanctions relief, the campaign of shuttle diplomacy for Shaybani, these are all top of mind. But I think this is going to become a much greater challenge for the interim government as they proceed into 2026 and find that they will be challenged by some of these key smuggling entities.
Thank you for that detail and for providing this overview. And we've long looked at your work in this area. Again, resources likely to dominate the discussion here. Patrick, can you talk about what we would call unresourced or under-resourced cities and the rise of local autonomous governance schemes? How does that play into this discussion?
Yeah, thanks, Colin. I think pretty much it relates to everything we said, in the sense that we have quite fantastic challenges, but also contradictions in the current Syrian landscape. The first one is the fact that we have, quite for the first time, a player that somehow relates in a way or another to political Islam that is massively sanctioned and at the same time quite significantly massively accepted. The result is that you have an under-resourced state, massively under-resourced, that is trying to spread its authority somehow over the country, but you have a significant bunch of resistances from players inside Syria, but as well who are part of them are friends of the and allies of the current new authorities. Others that are discussing and negotiating with them, but without being clear yet on what kind of agreement they're going to reach. And if you go to the ground, and if you look to the situation outside of Damascus, if you go to Hama, if you go to Halep, if you go to the south, you will see that pretty much what is on the rise is not only autonomous tendencies from those who do not agree with the state or with the new authorities, But you have a de facto situation where the local dynamics, local resource generation is just in the rise because you do not have the capacity of the central state to impose its authority. It is true, obviously, at the security sector level, but it's also true for the very basic services, like how does, for instance, the municipal services work in Dera, for instance? What is the role of a governor in Aleppo now? And if you see how the local settings are working now, you see that you have an increased tendency to rely on local resourcing, on local actors, might be businessmen, by the way, might be sometimes a diaspora. But the challenge here is that when you ask the capacity of the state to integrate, in general, what we have in mind is the capacity of the new authority of Ahmed Shara to deal with those who are still searching for a deal with them, i.e., among others, the Kurds in the northeast, the Druze in the south. But you have two equally important challenges, I think. Part of the allies now are also beginning to build sub-state structures. If you look, for instance, to the situational Ghouta, which is very close to the capital, you will see that there is an autonomous trend on the rise that is not so different in nature than from the one that you see in the northeast. So you're not only speaking about, some kind of centrifugal tendencies from those who do not agree with the authorities, but also even among friends and allies. And the second issue, I think, to really have keep in mind, it's not necessarily a bad trend, but it's the dynamic of cities, of local entrepreneurs, to now develop their own projects because the central state has just no capacities to project resources and authority on the peripheries beyond Damascus.
I spend a lot of time in Washington. When I talk to American policymakers, American decision makers, folks in the government, folks in the intelligence community, one of the biggest issues, if not the biggest issue, at least in the security realm, is this issue of foreign fighters, which we've discussed already. People are scared. They are really uncertain of what happens next. So I'd like to ask Wasim if you could talk about the position given to foreign fighters in the new Syrian army and what to expect there. Is there something you can say to assuage folks in Washington?
Thank you for this challenge. Well, actually, yes, it is the big issue because Syria is seen since like 15 years through this issue. While as Patrick said and as Caroline said, there's other very pressing issues that could help resolve this issue. But in my sense, working on jihadi groups since like 15 years, and I can maybe count an anecdote that was said to me by the actual foreign minister back in 2023. He was like, why should we talk to you, Wasim? We're in Idlib. You are a specialist in jihadi groups. We're not a jihadi group anymore. So now I can tell this story, you see. But the thing is, we have to think out of the box. Because foreign fighters in Afghanistan weren't monitored, and so they flew back to their home countries and ignited jihad in their own countries, right? Kosovo also at the same time. Why? Because once the war ended, there was no horizon for them, no political horizon, no inclusion for them. We talk a lot about inclusivity and inclusion regarding other Syrians, but you have also those foreign fighters who've been there since like 12, 14, 15 years. When I asked the question to Ahmed Shara in December, he said, you in Europe, if you marry with European, you have the nationality after 5 years. If you have European kids, you have European nationality or US nationality. Those people fought with us. We owe them in a way. So he said, we have to imagine something for them to include them in the new Syrian society. Because on one hand, as Jerome said, their own countries don't really want them back. So what would happen with them actually? And giving them a position for some in the new Syrian army is giving them a political frame, a political horizon in order to include them in the new system, which avoids turmoil maybe in their home countries. And we are mostly talking about people who live there, as I said, who married there, who have kids there. So maybe it's a good idea, since one more time, as Jerome said, there is no real demands regarding those people except security demands. Maybe we should think about it as giving them position and a role and a horizon and a frame, a Syrian frame, could be a solution. And permit me to say another time, solutions that can happen in Syria for this first disengagement from global jihad to political acceptance despite the sanctions could be and should be, in my humble opinion, that's what I'm writing for the Soufan Centers in 2021, should be an option for other places. Regarding maybe the Sahel, we're having a panel on the Sahel in a few hours. So we have to think out of the box regarding this issue. I understand that it could be scary to see them in the ranks of the new Syrian army, but I think it's a good idea to include them. And the challenge for the Syrians today is to explain to the world why is it a good idea. And let me end with one thing, because excluding them from the new Syria could cause turmoil for the world, which is maybe fair to think, but could cause turmoil also for the new Syrian authorities. How to canalize those people if you tell them you fought with us and now it's done, so you have to be jailed, excluded, or you have to find something for yourself. This is the beginning of new problems. So giving them a frame, giving them an horizon for them and their families is a good idea and not a scary idea. Thank you.
Thank you. And you have been, to your credit, writing about this for many years, and we've had these conversations ongoing, in fact, at this very forum, going back, I think, 2 or 3 years, if not longer. Ben, I'd like you to weigh in on kind of what Wasim said and where you see this going.
From an American, I don't speak for the American government, I'm not a government employee, but I mean, we're in a moment now where we are jettisoning historical lessons faster than we can, faster than we can operate. I don't know how it's happening this quickly, frankly. But, you know, for a long time, we've been trying to pretend that we didn't fight a 20-year war in Afghanistan, even while we were still fighting it, and we wanted to pretend we weren't fighting a war in Iraq. But we have very clear lessons from an American perspective, from the coalition partners' perspective, of what happens when you fail to include people in society, in civil society, in government, and even when you have absolute physical dominance over any armed group, any armed group. And you know, that's not what the new Syrian government has right now. They're at a disadvantage numerically and in other ways too. So the security situation is particularly tenuous. And this, if we're going to look back not just at the American experience in Iraq, where we closed out the fighting, and then we effectively terminated the Iraqi army, and then prevented anybody with high-level Ba'athist qualifications from, including Shia Arabs, I would add, and Kurds, from joining the army and the government. That's who became the core of the insurgency, not just the foreign fighters, right? So it's the people that we reject, the people that we fail to bring into the fold. And that's historically, if you look at a larger end academic view of this problem, that is historically the case. Exclusion does not work. So you're absolutely right. The trick is finding a rhetorical mechanism to ensure that the Americans and Westerners can get over the hump here. And I think there are stories we can tell ourselves about this, and I think that's a research way to do it. Permit me 30 seconds here. I'm going to tell you a brief one. In Ramadi in Iraq in 2004, we had a former Iraqi Special Forces commander who had joined the insurgency because he had lost his job when we closed out the army. He was the head of an improvised explosive device cell. He set an improvised explosive device that killed a U.S. Army captain in the city of Ramadi. He was sent to Abu Ghraib, was released on a technicality from Abu Ghraib, and when then General Mattis came to me and said, we need to find a commander for our new National Guard brigade, all the tribal leaders came to me and said, this is the guy to do it. And so we had to quickly come to terms with the fact that this guy who had killed a U.S. Army soldier was going to be our new commander for the National Guard Brigade. And we did it. We put him in place, and he actually turned out to be fairly effective, and he went on to have a career in the new Iraqi army. There are countless stories like that. And we have to remember our own history. I'm pointing a finger on my own chest here as an American. And I would argue that there are ways that the academic community and people in this room can maybe facilitate that conversation.
Some really important insights there, and I appreciate them. Jerome, can you talk a little bit more about this topic too? You've looked at it in terms of stabilizing the country internally and unifying a new army?
I mean, part of the issue now for the government is how do you create a new army, a new security sector? What preceded has basically evaporated. There is, like, the former army is not there. The pro-state, pro-regime militias have disappeared. So what the government thinks is that everything has to be built from scratch, that you're literally building an army from zero. For them, it brings a lot of opportunities. That's the way they see it. They think that even though HTS is only part of the insurgency, of the former insurgency, though the most structured and organized armed group, they think that somehow now they can include all the groups that were both in northwest Syria allied to them, or that were part of the National Army, allied or supported by Turkey, and the groups from the south, and so on, that they can bring all of them into the army. But it's easier said than done. The issue then is, how do you do it? Do you give parts of the army to different groups, which means that you don't really have a cohesive army, you just have a bunch of militias sharing the pie somehow, or do you create an integrated structure? Ideally, they want to create an integrated structure because they want to have central control. But the issue is how do you do it? What they think is that because they are starting from scratch, they can basically give positions to different leaders of the former armed opposition in different parts of the new army, so that they could break the groups that pre-existed, so that they don't have some level of autonomy within the army, so that they have something cohesive. They think that they have a lot of opportunities because they are starting from scratch. But they face a lot of challenges. Parts of the challenges is the absence of resources, because how do you gather all these groups together in a cohesive entity if you basically don't have the money to pay for their salary? So now officially they say that all the groups are part of the army. Increasingly they had to renounce the creation of a structured army. As opposed to that, they are simply transferring groups into new military divisions and trying to say that this is the starting point towards the construction of something new. But the risk is that you are sustaining those previous structures and you're not actually creating anything cohesive, which means that when actions like the recent massacres in March occur, there is confusion with the international community. Is the army responsible? Is the government responsible? Who exactly committed those actions? So that leads to a lot of pushback at the government, at both because it means it's either failing to control its military forces or it's somehow involved in the massacres. So in both cases, it reflects quite negatively on the government. And so what we are trying to push for or to advocate for is an end of the sanctions, a promotion of a united army. So it has to be financed. It has to be supported by foreign countries. It has to be fully restructured. But the last issue that the government is facing is that it's looking at the construction of the army in terms of the technicalities. It doesn't see it really as a political process, because the last issue for the government is that you can't simply ask all those groups to join the army and promote them into new positions without also making political concessions to them. And for now, it's lacking. So the next phase for the new government will also have to be increased discussions about what it means to share power also with those constitutive parts. And that includes the SNA, that will include the SDF, that will include the range of armed groups that are spread throughout the country.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, especially the last part, because I think both a theme and a tension that we keep hearing about is this idea of inclusion. Jennifer, can you talk to your understanding of developments on the ground with the SDF, with some of these other groups? How are you seeing the situation there?
Just to address first of what the council was told on Friday related to some of the points that both Patrick and Jerome brought up. So the special envoy briefed on his discussions with the interim president, Mr. Al-Shara, and noted that there is actually a positive intention to ensure that weapons cannot be held out of state control. Obviously, that's very complicated for the reasons that were already noted, but the intention is there, coupled with ideas on how to disarm, demobilize, and reintegrate the factions. So the conversations are happening. Obviously, an enabling political environment would go a long way to ensure that that happened. Additionally, the concerns of the council members were relayed to Mr. Al-Shara in discussions with my boss as well, that there needs to be more progress on this front, and exchanges are ongoing, including issue with several relevant states on that matter. So the conversations are happening. On the reintegration and discussions with the SDF, I think other members are more able to talk to this front, but I'll just reiterate that there have been several promising developments. Our office has been, we've noted that we're ready to assist, including with missions to the Northeast as well. I think that Mr. Al-Shara has noted that this is a Syrian dialogue process with the support of the international community, but again, that most of these processes should be Syrian-led.
Celine, some would argue that stability is impossible without inclusion, and inclusion is a big part of transitional justice. So can you talk a little bit about your ideas toward that end and some of the research that you've been doing, which is incredibly impressive?
So I am a minority in Syria. I'm Circassian from the Golan Heights. And today when we're seeing this rhetoric being used again and again and again, I think that it's a responsibility on us as minorities to say that what happened in Syria was to a certain degree sectarian, even though we don't like saying this. And some people haven't been, acknowledging this for the past 14 years, but it was sectarian. The past 50 years, the Assad regime did use the divide and conquer method. And as a society, I believe that we as Syrians don't know each other. We weren't allowed the space or the trust or the ability to get to know each other. I wrote my thesis on the culture of fear and how fear became in our subconscious. You didn't trust your literal uncle because they would write a report in your name and you would disappear forever. So trying to get, after all of this, trying to get to a point where we can trust each other and we can, start to have this nationalism, because we don't. Over all these 50 years, we did not feel like we belonged to this country because it was Assad's Syria, it wasn't our Syria. So today, trying to implement that and trying to have people understand that we are all Syrians and we need to put all of our victimhoods and our traumas and our personal experiences that we've lived that are valid over the past 14 years, trying to put all of that to the side is difficult. But I believe that it is the only thing that is going to get us to get out of the cycle of violence that we're seeing today. We need to, like in Arabic, Bashar al-Assad used to say it, Assad lil-abad. Today we need to dialogue lil-abad. We need to dialogue and get to know each other and get to know each other's sacrifices and victimhoods, so we can all understand that we were all victims to this regime. We're all victims and survivors, and again, the only way that we'll be able to break this cycle is if we recognize that and try to understand how we're going to get out of this with the least amount of bloodshed as possible.
I think the cycle of violence comment is something that really resonates with a lot of folks here, those that study de-radicalization in particular. And so I'm hoping, Patrick, you can speak to this concept of de-radicalization and what you're seeing.
Well, it's a quite broad subject and a huge one, but I think if we want, in a nutshell, to try to capture what maybe is going on within the ranks of HTS since years, actually, is something quite unique in comparison to other Salafi jihadi armed groups who went through processes of changing their religious and or political mindset, and which makes the very specificity of HTS. On the contrary, for instance, of the Egyptian jihad movement or the Libyan one, where that the previous experiences of de-radicalization, between brackets, were basically driven from a position of weakness in jails and triggered by an ideological reformation of some kind. HTS is exactly the opposite. It began when they were in a position of strength, increasingly gaining power in the opposition areas, and without any theological transformation. There's no muraja'at, if you want, for those who speak Arabic, within the ranks of HTS, which is both a strength in the sense that the dynamics is rooted on the ground, is not an intellectual exercise, it's very practical, triggered by political decision, but it's also a weakness in the sense that it leaves open the question, who are they? So what's happening in a nutshell, in minutes? I mean, over almost 7 to 8 years since the delinking with Al-Qaeda, HTS faced significant challenges. Some of them were related to their relation with their own constituencies, with the society. Some others were related with the political alliances, mainly the alliance with Turkey. The more you interact and engage with the society, the more ideological concessions you have to do. Same thing with your relation with Turkey. The more ideological concessions you do, the more contestation you have within their own rank. If you want to keep the cohesion of the movement, you have, to silence those who oppose, the hardliners pretty much. And what you have is a movement of politically driven transformation and ideological concession that pretty much created new strategic reality, even if all the moves were pragmatic one. So now what we can say is, first of all, we cannot say anymore that HTS is a Salafi movement. Second, and why? Because HTS over those years was much more transformed by the society that they were trying to aim at transforming the society, which is basically the objective of Salafi group. The second thing, they cannot be qualified as a jihadi movement in the broader sense of the modern jihadi movements, in the sense that the whole ideology about, getting over, the close enemy or the far enemy, prioritizing the warfare on a political dynamic, all this was reversed. Actually, since years, HTS was backing a truce and an understanding between Turkey and Russia, even protecting joint Russian-Turkish patrol on their own controlled territories. Third, HTS cannot be considered as being close to the Muslim Brothers as well. The Muslim Brothers had this very overarching objective of controlling society, reframing society. It was a mass movement. HTS is an elite-based armed group that seized power, that has only a very instrumental at the time relation to governance. So now what we have is a broader Sunni, that's the reference that Ahmed Shara Jolani was regularly using. It's basically a Sunni conservative revolutionary project, quite undetermined from an ideological perspective. And I think one of the challenges that will both relate to the issue of, I'm going to finish this, on the issue of domestic acceptance, but also on the issue of international acceptance and the issue of sanctions, is the issue of ideological clarification. For very good reasons, they were not doing this when they were in Idlib, because the contestation of the hardliners at the time was still too hard. Now, when you are heading a country, controlling a state, dealing with a much more diverse society, I think ideological clarification becomes an imperative, and I think it would be one of the key elements to build trust, not only with our own constituencies, but also with their regional and with their international environment. Thank you.
So a lot of the challenges we've been talking about so far have been internal. But as everybody that follows the situation in Syria knows, there's no shortage of external risk, particularly in the security realm. So Caroline, can you talk to the challenges countering some external security risks, such as repeated Israeli airstrikes, a potential Turkish role in parts of the Northeast, Iran-backed militant groups? I know that's a wide swath, but again, it's kind of hitting from all vectors.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think it closely correlates, and it's very closely related to some of the internal challenges. If I might just quickly make a comment about the SDF deal with Damascus. I think perhaps looking a year ahead, this is probably the highest stakes opportunity that the new interim government has. And as Salim just brilliantly talked about, there's this culture of distrust. There have been different incidents of violence, both big and small. Just 2 days ago, there were clashes in the south between the Druze community and members of the MOD with the new Syrian interim government. And then, of course, there was the much larger bout of violence along the coast in Latakia. And these are incidents that I think have a huge risk of disruption when it comes to the SDF security integration deal that was made with Damascus. And when you look at the deal and the intentions of this agreement, it's a year-long negotiation process. Really, one of the few shared visions is integration. But when we get down to the details, and the devil is in the details, there's a lack of consensus. When you talk to folks over at the Syrian Democratic Council and within the SDF, they have different visions. For example, a semi-autonomous region, or having the SDF as modeled after, for example, the QIASS, the Kurdish security forces in Iraq, or maybe a mini KRG. These are models that I think many can attest to may not necessarily work in the Syrian model. So while, of course, it's an opportunity for integration, I have a lot of concerns about this negotiation process souring. And as a result, I completely agree with you, Celine, and many others that have just mentioned that this culture of distrust, it needs to be addressed. And there needs to be many opportunities for building that momentum. Now shifting to the external challenges, because that is crucial to get your house in order to defend Syria from these external challenges. Of course, we've seen repeated strikes from Israel in the Golan and even as far as into the suburbs of Damascus. Additionally, of course, we've seen Turkish intentions to try and establish basing opportunities inside of Syria. There have been some methods and some plans proposed, even establishing Turkish presence in the south of Syria. There have also been some proposals to create an anti-ISIS coalition with the collaboration of the new Syrian government. And these overtures have been made from, for example, the government of Iraq, the government of Turkey, the government of Jordan. And these are models that could potentially work, but of course require security, stability, and kind of momentum inside of the country, especially amongst Syria's security forces. And I think that that's where this SDF deal is so crucial. The opportunity here is that there are so many different fighting forces that would be involved in this integration agreement that have experience with countering ISIS. They have equipment, they have battlefield experience. They do have, of course, different doctrine, but at the same time, I think that it's a huge opportunity to try and share those experiences, try and ensure that these lessons learned and intelligence are exchanged. But of course, there's not necessarily the shared vision here, and I worry a lot about when it comes to the SDF's role, whether it, of course, will be either dissolved and absorbed into a larger Syrian army, or potentially being given a special status, how the resources are going to be shared, how, if there's going to be that pervasive culture of distrust, and how that will translate into stability in trying to counter these external challenges.
All very well said. I'd like to stay on the topic of external threats. So Ben, can you talk to the risk of Iranian re-infiltration and resumption of activities, because again, when I go to Washington, that's really topic number one, or very close to the top of the list, talking to folks in the U.S. government about their concerns about what happens next. And it does get their ear when we talk about Syria. So there's many things we've talked about here today that are important and arguably more important, but that is also at the very top of the list among some decision makers.
Yeah, this builds from our panel yesterday. I mean, look, it's difficult not to be cynical about the kind of transactional approach, at least from my perspective, that our government is taking in the region. And by the way, that has been our approach in the Middle East prior to the new Trump administration for quite some time. So with maybe a veneer of relationship building and some genuine efforts along the way. But for the most part, we've been trying to extract ourselves from the Middle East for some time, with Iran being the remaining focal point as a primary security concern. So perhaps the Iran threat is a way to manage American and perhaps also European focus in order to create a confidence-building measure mechanism or the impetus to support the Syrian state and the development of Syrian security. I think it's very clear that the Iranians are on their, I mean, we all collectively agree the Iranians are on the back foot for the moment. I don't need to list all the things that they've recently lost since October 7th. And they are under significant pressure to reach a deal on the nuclear threat. However, you know, what I posited yesterday, or 2 days ago now, is that if we do cut a deal, even if we don't cut a deal, either way the Iranians are going to continue to do the same thing that they've been doing, because it's the same regime, they have the same motivations, the same intent. They have every intent to move back into Syria. They have every intent to try to reassert control and rebuild Hezbollah. And all of the things that they had previously. These are old fossilized brains that want the fossilized things that they had. So if we leave a vacuum here, I think that it's very clear, first of all, that the Russians are going to move their way back in. And from a Western perspective, right, they already are, as Wassim is pointing out in my ear here. I mean, that's true, right? And so that's something I think there were high hopes in the United States, at least, that when the regime was overthrown, that the Russians would be kicked out of Latakia and Tartus, and that's temporarily that happened, and now they're working their way back in. The Iranians have much stronger relationships in Syria, and I think that a lot more inroads to be able to find a way back in. And if that happens, they're not going to be actors, this is again my opinion, they're not going to be actors for peace. They're not going to help build a regional or international coalition to stabilize and facilitate reconstruction in a way that's meaningful for a new Syrian state. I think it'll be disruptive instead. So I would argue again, when we think about confidence building measures to try to bring in external support, and I know that there are differing viewpoints on Iran's role here. If we're looking at this and trying to bring in from an American and perhaps Western perspective, Iran is a good leverage point.
Wassim, did you want to tack on the Russia piece?
Yes. Well, actually, the Russians are, of course, taking the way back to Syria because it's very important for them. Because for those among you who are military, you should know, for example, I think you know, that the Tartus port is the only port that is capable to harbor Russian submarines on the Mediterranean. And after the war in Ukraine, the Black Sea is closed. So it's vital for them to have access to Tartus. And of course, the Syrian authorities don't insult the future, because Russia still is a member of the Security Council, and as long as the US in particular, because Europe is making steps, doesn't make a clear step of lifting sanctions and of helping this new government, well, they will seek options in other places. Just we have to remember, for example, that Russian troops retreated from all over Syria to the coast, and not one bullet was shot on them. I had put footage myself of French foreign fighters filming Russian troops going by them. This tells us two things: that the new Syrian authorities are capable of cutting deals with power brokers and important states in the world. By the way, Ashara addressed Russia while the war was still ongoing, before the fall of Damascus, because it is his interest. And on the other hand, it tells us that those foreign fighters who did this footage did not shoot on the Russian troops, meaning they were under strict control, actually, of HTS. And Russia, for example, sent already 2 batches of money, of cash, to Syria, because as you know too, Syrian money is printed in Russia since 2011. And so who controls cash controls the economy. And as we speak, the new Syrian authorities don't control much of the cash in Syria because it is controlled by former regime supporters, by drug traffickers and Captagon traffickers. So the new way to control the economy is to print new money. And to print new money, it has to be printed maybe in France, Switzerland, or another place. But to give them back control on the economy, they have to get back control on cash. And I will end with this. Russia already sent 4 oil tankers and gas to Syria. This is vital for the Syrians. This is very tangible measures that are seen by the new authorities and that are seen also by the Syrian population. And Russia, when it's going in for its own interests. It's not advocating human rights. It's not calling for inclusivity. It's not calling for parity. It's only about interest. And if the new Syrian authorities don't have the choice, of course, they will take the hand that is given to them. So we have a strategic change in Syria after more than half a century with the fall of Assad, that the West, or at least the states, are maybe missing today. When you talk also about the new authorities, even about Israel, for example, as in December, Shara told me himself, we don't want to cause trouble for neighboring countries. The only country he named by name was Israel. So if it is tactically understandable that Israel hits the Syrian military facilities after the fall of Assad, like militarily speaking, it could be understood because they did not know who's going to get control of ballistic missiles or former chemical facilities. But incursions, as it was said by Karan, are even militarily and tactically not understandable as we speak, especially that the foreign minister of Syria talked about the accord of the ceasefire of 1974. They talk about Israel as Israel, not as the entity, as some of you have maybe heard by other parties in the region. So there's a strategic moment that could be missed. And other parties as Iran or Russia or others are ready to play ball. So it's up to the West and especially the US, because France did a lot in regard for the Kurds, in regard of lifting partially the sanctions. The only obstacle today is US sanctions. So this is what should be tackled, taking care of the Syrian majority, meaning the Sunni majority that suffered for more than half a century. And if you take care of the majority, other communities will benefit from it. Today, all communities in Syria are backing the new government. If we talk about the Christians, if we talk about the others. But if no money is going in, if the economy isn't working again, as Jerome said, where would they find the money? And I will end with this. Militarily speaking, what made HTS succeed to take over Damascus is also that factions were dissolved and brigades were made. Meaning brigades not based on regional basis. Today, because of lack of resources, New Syrian authorities, as Jerome said, are going back to brigades based on regional basis, which means that brigades they could maybe not control tomorrow because of the lack of assets and because if people are serving in their hometowns, de facto, you'll create a kind of separation with the central government. So we are asking them a lot about controlling those people, but we are not giving them the means to control their own country and their own troops to begin with, because that's where all begins. I traveled in Syria back and forth. It's describe it as a desert of rubble between Aleppo and Damascus. Up to 3 minutes from central Damascus, it is rubble. in Kabul, other places. Even people who are displaced in camps, they cannot go back because there's nothing. No schools, no hospitals, no infrastructure. So how can you demand them to control their own, to have security, to fight terrorism, to fight the Islamic State, and you don't give them the means to do it? And of course, if you don't, if we don't, others will. And they won't do it for human rights. They will do it for their own interests, which could collide with the interests of the people in this room. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And what you started describing was what life is like for Syrians. I'd like to turn to Celine and then maybe Jennifer to give us an overview and what you're seeing and what you know, the human security aspect of what we're talking about here, moving away from traditional security.
Thank you so much. What Wasim was saying is so important, and I wish that we can try to convince the U.S. to kind of take on what Europe has done and to kind of take on the approach that Europe has taken, which could be for their interests, and that's valid, and I get that because of the refugees and da-da-da. But we can look at what Europe is doing and try to be like, okay, maybe let's follow suit. They're doing it, we can try. We can have these conversations, even if they're uncomfortable, even if we're scared, even if, hey, because again, as Wasim was saying, if we don't do it, someone else will. And at this point, I will tell you that Syrians, whether that's individuals, people that want to open up businesses today, or the interim government, will take any helping hand, no matter who it is. And we don't want to go to people that have been killing us for 14 years. We don't want to go to Russia that's been, barrel bombing us for all these years. But when we're put in this situation, when we're put in this, things have to happen. And we need to build the country. And there's not much time left for us to continue to live in tents and continue to, I used to go to Northwest before the regime fell, and I was able to before. Like it's cities of camps, and that applies to Lebanon, that applies to Turkey, that applies to Jordan, and these people again haven't been able to come back. So I don't know how we're expecting all of these expectations and all of these things from a very torn up reality, and from an interim government that's trying to balance everyone and that's trying to keep everyone happy internationally and internally. It's a lot that we're asking. But with all of these asks, we need to be realistic, and we need to understand that literally over half of the country is reduced to rubble, and Syrians are exhausted and tired. And today, and I'm sure my colleagues that have visited, they can tell that people are so overly excited that they just want anything, any conference, any talk, any workshop that they can attend, that they can. There's people coming from Idlib and Hamas to Damascus to attend a Jazeera workshop, literally crossing provinces to come and attend something that is going to give them a chance to get a better life. People's salaries are $10, so if people try to understand the opportunity that we can, as an international community, as whatever it is, can get out of Syria as an ally, as friends, and be able to give these people a chance to live after half a century of this misery.
I fully defer to Celine about how Syrians are feeling, but just to give some of the numbers, I think before December 8th, 90% of the population was living in poverty. So it was a huge amount. When you look at food insecurity alone, it was 12.1 million who were food insecure, and I think you've seen announcements of reductions to WFP's food funding at a time when it's absolutely critical. It's one of the world's largest displacement crises, so you have 7 million internally displaced persons, an equal number of refugees. I see Mariana is in the room. 50 to 70% of Syria's healthcare expertise left the country. There were significant bombings that continued on Syria's healthcare industry into 2024. When it comes to children, 75% of Syria's 10.5 million children were born after the conflict started. I think the last numbers were 40% of schools remain closed. 500,000 children, at least 500,000 children, are suffering from major malnutrition. Again, among the massively food insecure. When it comes to the disappeared, 100,000 people are still searching for answers. So in addition to the 100,000 people, obviously the numbers are even bigger when you take into account the mothers, the fathers, the brothers that are looking. It's an issue that affects nearly every, if not every, Syrian family. 320,000 unexploded ordnances. So again, as I noted in the beginning, we're seeing daily explosions because of roads that people are using now that they haven't used before. So an immediate need for mine removal. When it comes to Syria's GDP, it's half of its 2011 unemployment has tripled. If growth rate continued as it is today, we'd be looking at 2080 until Syria even recovered its pre-war. So we're looking, I mean, all of us will have passed by then. And then when I go back to the actual funding, of the $2 billion, I just looked up what has been received when Syria has actually been in the headlines quite significantly. We're 8% funded. So I really think that this is a life-saving, critical issue when it comes to the needs of the Syrian people. And it's not just a humanitarian issue, first and foremost. I think, as Wasim and others have noted, it's a security issue. Like, we really need to make sure, I mean, we should be doing it for the moral imperative of ensuring that the Syrians have what they need, but there's also a regional and international imperative as well.
Some of those statistics are absolutely dire, and those are not just numbers, those are real people, and incredibly grim. I'd like to ask Sue, do you see consensus to alter sanctions, right? Because there's so much talk about sanctions relief. What's the process? How quickly could that potentially happen?
Thanks, Colin. So a couple points I just wanted to make, because I really think that it's important, as I said yesterday, to distinguish between UN sanctions, which all member states are obliged to implement, and sanctions by individual member states. For example, the US, the EU, UK, a number who have sanctions that were primarily focused against the Assad regime. So a number of those states have taken steps to eliminate the sanctions against the Assad regime or to modify them. And I think that's a very important point. Unfortunately, for example, in the US, there is congressional legislation that opposes the sanctions on Syria, and that ties the hand of an administration because it requires legislation. Or some modification, et cetera. But I think it's important to note that Syria is one of the most heavily sanctioned states in the world because of what's happened in the last 10 years, et cetera. And prior, going back many years ago, it was a designated terrorist state. So it's important that steps are being taken, but they can be complicated. But I think just last week, the UK took steps to modify its domestic sanctions towards Syria to make it easier. Secondly, another thing that's important to note, and I'm glad Jennifer brought this up, humanitarian need is incredible in Syria. And sanctions over the last several years, the Security Council has debated and put in place measures to provide for a humanitarian exception to all sanctions measures. So initially it was just for the Taliban. It existed previously for Somalia. It was extended after the Taliban takeover in 2021, which I think was quite important. And then it was extended to all sanctions regime. But the 1267 regime was limited to 2 years. In December, the Security Council took the step of putting that on the same basis as all other humanitarian sanctions. So there is a humanitarian exception to counterterrorism sanctions. And I think that's really important to understand. There's a lot of folks that don't understand that, and sometimes inappropriately calling for humanitarian exceptions when it's not. They may be providing something that's not falling under humanitarian. But I think that is important. On the question of UN sanctions, so there is a process that exists. It's in the guidelines, it's in the resolution that provides for how member states go about delisting entities or ending sanctions. It's, as has noted, it clearly is easier to add sanctions and to add people to the list than it is to take them off. But there is a process, and specifically, it allows a designating state, if a member state is the one who proposed it initially, it's a privileged status. Then that state has a privileged position to be able to come back to the council and say that or the committee, and say they want sanctions removed. It is a situation, though, where there needs to be a consensus. And so once there is consensus, political consensus among the 15 member states, it can happen very quickly. It's in less than 60 days, and there's the ability to even do that more quickly. But I emphasize that it is a matter of consensus. And so if there are parties who do not agree for whatever domestic foreign policy, for whatever the reason, they can block it. So the importance of multilateral discussions, of member states coming together and having common objectives in what the negotiations are with the government and what needs to be done for the lifting of those sanctions, I think is very important. And again, the sanctions criteria is based on the group's support for terrorism. Okay, it's not something more broadly. It's not something where you have to cut off relations with one country or whatever. It is focused on counterterrorism objectives. So the more there is clarity and transparency with what the new government is doing in terms of dealing with the terrorist threat, with ISIL, with remnants, et cetera, and foreign terrorist fighters who are still designated, I think that's important. And it is, so if you go to our annex of our report from December, it has the list of all of those entities. Clearly, 30 of the individuals that are listed, 9 of them we counted as dead. And there is a process for taking them off. Sometimes there is a high bar member states require about how you take them off. And then there are 10 entities, so a total of 30 who are on the list. But that's something, again, that we will be reporting on since this happened in December. We didn't have much to say in the December report. We are collecting information now. Happy to have any information that people have because we will be writing the next report in June. Thanks, Colin.
Thank you very much. Sadly, we've reached the end of the side event. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank the experts for participating today, our gracious hosts. But please, the remainder of the day, find folks, approach them, ask questions. Let's keep this conversation going because it's an incredibly important one. So thank you very much.